Hello, welcome back to the channel. I have a fun and maybe a little bit of a different video for you today. I have been wanting to make a video like this for a while, and I decided today was the day. So I've got my coffee. It's the morning. We're talking. It is certainly Canadian Highlander related, but I'm likely going to post this off of the regular cadence just because I don't want you to lose out on the dedicated Canadian Highlander content. But I've been wanting to make a video like this for a while, and yeah, so I figured I'd fire it off. So let me know if you enjoy this kind of thing, and if so, I'll try and make more. I want to talk about bans and about format management. So obviously, if you are an entrenched Magic player outside of the Canadian Highlander format, you will know that on November 10th, about a week ago as of time of recording, there was a ban and restricted announcement. This was a hotly awaited ban and restricted announcement. Standard has been a mess for a while at this point. VV has been really problematic, and to a lesser extent, the mono red deck has also been really problematic. If you've played any of that format, you know that like these are basically the only two strategies that have been playable for months at this point, and Wizards about a month and a half ago announced that there would be a ban announcement on November 10th, and it finally came out. So we're mostly going to look at my face today, but let's look at the ban announcement really quick. So they banned VV, they banned Screaming Nemesis, and they banned Prof's Eidetic Memory. So obviously these bans all make sense. These were required. They banned VV. They banned another card that they think is going to do VV-esque things potentially with the Cauldron deck. And then they also banned Screaming Nemesis because they're worried that Mono Red will become the new best deck again if you just ban the deck that was beating it, which makes sense. And what I kind of want to talk about is whether or not this cadence of bans is really sustainable long-term for the format. I'm also going to talk briefly about the legacy bans, but I'll do that in a minute. So what I basically want to talk about is, like, if we look at the way that this ban and restricted announcement happened, it was announced that it was going to happen, and then it happened on November 10th. And then they said in this article that they are updating the cadence at which they're going to be doing bans, which I think is a great step forward. But I think that there is a real conversation to be had about whether or not it is viable to manage living formats like Standard with ban lists anymore, or with ban lists in this way anymore. And the reason for that is that if you look at all of these bans, basically, they were done as, in all cases, like maybe 6 months too late. And this has been a general feeling in the Magic community for much longer than just this VV problem. I think that it has maybe become amplified in recent times because Standard is kind of like the flagship format that Wizards wants to be able to point to as, hey, here's our way to play Magic. This is how you onboard players into the format. And I think that makes sense that is sort of like that would be their flagship format, and when it's broken, it's bad. And Standard's been bad before, but they've typically been able to deal with it relatively quickly. But I would say kind of like the last 2 years has been especially rough for Standard. They've had to make a lot of bans and a lot of changes. Like, I think there's like, 14 cards on the Standard ban list right now. And the reason for this is twofold. One is that they have been printing more cards than ever, and so clearly there is pressure on getting these releases out, and as a result, there are issues with fully testing cards against the rest of the format. An obvious example of that is how Nadu leaked into Modern. It was originally designed as a commander card that would give things flash, and was changed last minute to the new text box, and obviously the new text box was unbelievably broken and not especially deeply tested, and it's now banned in basically every format you would play it in. I mean, I don't think there's a vintage Nadu deck, and I don't think it would be good enough in that format, but it is a card that joins the ranks of some other dubious cards that just can't exist in either format that they were technically printed for. And I think that the reason that this is happening in part, so that's happening because of design pressure and design pressure related to Commander. But the reason why Standard is feeling unmanageable and why we felt like Standard has felt bad is that there needs to be a willingness to make these ban choices faster. And that comes with a cost, a really obvious cost, right? The kind of ugly truth and the quiet part that Wizards specifically can't say out loud is that Magic cards have intrinsic monetary value to their players, and banning them represents significant financial loss for their players. So it's not something that they can kind of like wield around really willy-nilly, because you will lose consumer confidence. And I think that Standard now represents a small enough portion of their player base that maybe they could do that and it wouldn't be that much of a problem to the bottom line, right? I mean, I think you can look at the Commander ban incident that happened and that resulted in Wizards retaking custody of the taking custody of the format as what happens when bans happen on a format that's played more widely, right? Like that obviously created a really heinous situation with people making death threats and things like that, which is insane. But Wizards can't just ban cards on like a monthly cadence or on a bi-monthly cadence necessarily, which is probably what you would need, I think, in order to maintain the viability of the format long term. And if we look at other games, let's start by looking digital, right? If you look at the way that digital card games are managed, they are allowed to change cards. And you can offer like in-game currency or in-game card creation currency refunds to players when those card changes happen, and you're kind of allowed to do that more dynamically. Now, interestingly, I actually think that most digital CCGs still don't do that. They still don't make changes on the cadence that you really need to. I think maybe the best game in my experience of the ones that I've played for making dynamic changes fast is Marvel Snap, where they make like one or two changes, it feels like, at least a month, and they have OTA updates that don't even require a patch, which is great. That those kinds of things are very effective. And I don't know, I mean, I don't think the Marvel Snap has a perfect meta, certainly, and they obviously have their own issues associated with modern card design, but it's better. It's better than it could be. If you look at games like Shadowverse, for example, another game that I've been playing a little bit of recently, like that's a game where we're 4 sets in. The game's been out for like 4 months now, something like that, 5 months now. And they've only made 2 changes to cards, or two sets of changes so far to cards. And I think they could make more, but they haven't really. And overall, I think that there's this real issue that you encounter when you need to fundamentally alter whether or not a card works the way that it was printed when a person purchased that card or crafted that card in a digital context. So what do you do? Like what's the alternative? And I think I wanted to look at like some other options that exist across the card game spectrum as to what you could do to maybe address this problem. And then we'll come back to Magic and we'll talk about it again. So the first one I just wanted to talk about, and in part I wanted to talk about this just to kind of illustrate that like literally no card game is going to be safe from this, right? Card games are really, really hard to balance, and that's only getting harder as the transfer of information gets faster, as every new card game that comes out gets a gray area legal digital client, like basically right away, because card games are like relatively easy to just create a web app that you can play the game with. I mean, I say easy in quotation marks, but comparatively, like the bar for doing so is not that high. So, for example, one of the other games that I play a lot of, and it's not in my background yet, but soon my Darth Maul promo card will be in my background. But this is Star Wars Unlimited, and this is a Fantasy Flight Games card game. This has existed for a little over a year, and in the year that this game has been out, we've had 3 ban announcements. We've had to ban 5 cards. Interestingly, if you're not familiar with Star Wars Unlimited, basically, like, you can think of these symbols as being kind of color identity symbols. And so this black one is villainy, this yellow one is cunning. And cunning has been problematic, and cunning villainy in particular has been very problematic. They have had to ban 3 cunning villainy cards and 4 cunning cards total. And then, yeah, most recently we banned Force Throw. This one was problematic. If you don't play Star Wars Unlimited, I won't talk about it too long. But basically, for the Magic players, this card was your opponent discards 1, and then you deal damage equal to a creature equal to the CMC of the card they discarded. And this card was supposed to be conditional on you playing like specific unit types in your deck, and then they printed a lot of cards with that unit type that were very reasonable to play, and it all of a sudden became really trivial to enable the dealing damage part of the card. So anyway, so this game's existed for a year. It's banned 5 cards, and to be completely honest with you, there's probably 2 or 3 other cards that could be on this banned list that aren't, because the game is experiencing its first rotation soon, and I think they're just going to rotate those cards out and be done with them that way. So all this to say, this is not a Magic exclusive problem. This is a TCG as a whole problem. And if you look at as well, I don't play this one, but I knew this was happening. There was basically an emergency Yu-Gi-Oh! Ban list update about 2 weeks ago as well. There was dissent in the ranks. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Players who were playing even at the highest level were basically saying that the games felt unplayable, that every game felt like it ended on turn 1, whether it was like you just literally died on turn 1 or you were locked out of the game on turn 1. And so I won't pretend to know enough about how Yu-Gi-Oh! Functions to tell you why these specific 7 cards were banned. I know that broadly speaking, I believe they're what are called floodgates in that format. They kind of like prevent people from going off. But this is all to say, card games, hard to balance. Every card game is having this problem. Every card game experiences ban and restricted issues. So it's not a Magic exclusive thing. So for people who are basically looking at, is it a Universes Beyond problem? Is it we're releasing too much product problem? I think that that's part of the problem, for sure. I don't think that those design factors aren't irrelevant, but it is also just a thing that happens in every card game. Card games are hard to balance. So what do you do? How can you do this differently? How can you approach bans and restrictions and managing formats in a way that doesn't feel quite so oppressive? I think that option 1 is actually a kind of interesting approach, which is that it's something that One Piece does. And I would be remiss not to talk about a Bandai card game. And so what the One Piece TCG does is they have a ban list. Like they have a ban list of cards that are just banned. You just can't play this card. Whoops, I clicked on it. My mistake. I didn't mean to do that. But then recently they have introduced this concept of banned pair cards. And so One Piece is another game that features a leader mechanic. Worth noting, Star Wars Unlimited is also a game with a leader mechanic. So you always start with a leader in play. It's like a persistent effect, like a commander, basically with an eminence effect, if you're familiar with that. And One Piece is the same. It's a game where you have a leader, so you're always going to have access to this card. And so what the Bandai approach for, and what the devs for One Piece decided to do, was to ban a pair of cards, was to say you can't play specifically this Monkey D. Luffy leader with either of these other cards, that those specific interactions were too powerful. But you're still allowed to play Monkey D. Luffy, and you're still allowed to play these other 2 cards, you just can't play them together. Now, I don't know if that works in a standard Magic example, and I don't think for Commander you would want to manage it that way, if I'm being totally honest. But it's at least an option to think about, right? Like, what if instead of doing this VV and Profs ban, what if we just said you can't play VV and Cauldron together? That pairing is now banned, and we did that more dynamically. We banned that right after the Pro Tour when the deck looked broken and it was pretty obvious that the deck was unfair. What if we just said that? What if we just said, hey, you can't play these cards together? What if we said you can't play Heartfire Hero and Screaming Nemesis in the same deck, but you can play one or the other? I don't know that fixes it, and for me, this is the least compelling solution to the format, I just want to say. But it's something to think about, right? Like, it's interesting that this would be a way to manage interactions that get found that are problematic without outright removing cards from formats and inflicting that negative interaction on players. Now, obviously, if you ban Vivi and Cauldron being played together, both those cards are likely going to see like some amount of decrease in price. They're going to become intrinsically less valuable. Your players are going to be negatively impacted. If you built the Vivi Cauldron deck, all of a sudden, you don't have a deck technically. But it's not unreasonable, I think, to think that you could recover from that situation faster and more easily than if this happens and your deck just gets banned and is not legal anymore. Similarly, this is why I wanted to bring it back to talking about Legacy. They've been trying to manage this Reanimator deck for the better part of almost 2 years now. The deck was already problematic when it was doing like Grief Reanimate stuff. That was already problematic. Then they printed Psychic Frog. And it really turned the volume up to 11 on that deck. Like, all of a sudden, this deck that was already pretty powerful and was doing this really challenging juke where you were either fighting against a combo deck that had these really powerful Entomb Reanimate draws, or you were fighting against this attrition-based deck that was going to go like turn 1 Grief Reanimate you, turn 2, they were playing like Murktide Regent out of the sideboard and like Orcish Bowmasters. So like maybe they would just do that to you in game 2 when you boarded in all your graveyard hate. Now all of a sudden they got this card that did it all. They would like turn 1 Grief you, then play Psychic Frog, and you would just die. And they've been trying to manage that for the better part of 2 years. Frog is gone, Grief is gone. They banned Troll of Khazad-dûm. They tried to ban around the Reanimator package for a long time. And then finally in this ban and restricted announcement, they had to just say, okay, Entomb is getting the cut. And this kind of iconic Legacy card, which has not always been legal. I should remember, because it was always been legal since I've been playing Legacy, but Bosch and Roll likes to remind us all that this card has not literally always been legal. But for me, it's an iconic Legacy card anyway. And, it gets banned. And what if instead of banning this, you said, hey, you can't play Entomb plus X in the same deck? Maybe it is Reanimate. Maybe you say Entomb Reanimate is banned, but it lets you keep the card in the format, and it doesn't have maybe as negative of an impact. And most importantly, you could have made that change way faster. And because you're not outright banning cards from formats, you're banning interactions, you are allowed to be more dynamic with those choices. Now, there are obvious issues with this approach and with this management structure. Chiefly, it's complicated, right? If you're explaining to a player, oh, here's the ban list, and also you can't play these cards together, like, yeah, that's not ideal. But I don't know, like, I think we're all pretty entrenched these days with what we want to be playing, and decklist submission and management is going like more and more digital every day. So that kind of thing is likely solvable by technology for larger tournaments. It's not as though, I don't think the complexity is so high that this kind of solution is outrageous. I think the big opposition that you would see is that this solution is weird and pretty ham-fisted, right? Like, you are really directly saying, we think the problem is these two cards interacting. But I think increasingly it's become pretty obvious what the problematic interactions are, right? Like, everyone knows that it's Vivi plus Cauldron that was the problem. It wasn't Vivi, it wasn't Cauldron, it was Vivi and, well, it might have been Cauldron, but that's a different conversation. It was Vivi plus Cauldron that specifically pushed the Vivi Cauldron deck over the top. And yeah, my mono red example was bad, right? Like, it's probably not reasonable to be like, you can't play Heartfire Hero and Monstrous Rage in the same deck. Like, okay, yeah, that's maybe not so good. But I digress, right? Like, you could even use, like One Piece uses, a hybridized version of this strategy. Another option, and I don't have a specific thing pulled up for this, so I guess we'll just go back to full cam, is the Flesh and Blood strategy. So what Flesh and Blood does is that as cards win, specifically the leaders, they have a ban list, but then as leaders win tournaments, they are basically like acquiring points towards being banned. So the whole community kind of knows when a leader is likely to end up on the ban list and not be playable anymore. That's more manageable in a game like Flesh and Blood, because I believe there's only one format. So that is probably not an applicable solution to Magic, which is why I didn't really bring it up, but I'm reminded of it now. But I think there has to be a better way. And I think that it is interesting that, I brought up this this emergency ban list from Yu-Gi-Oh! Because this is one option. It's ban 7 cards after uproar from the community and hope that fixes things. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Has actually done a different thing at the exact same time. And it's Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesys. It's a points list. And we're bringing it back to Canadian Highlander. Surprise, surprise, right? So this is another format. It's new. I haven't had a chance to talk about it on the channel yet. I think it's very interesting. Like, this format might make me play Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm not even exaggerating. Like, if this format becomes playable on a digital client, like, I'm probably in. And the thing that this is doing is it is saying, okay, we have unbanned everything that was banned. I don't know that you want to do that for Magic necessarily, but then we've got this points list, and we manage the points list as our way of managing what is legal in the format. And I don't know the exact number of updates they've made to this list. It's like 2 or 3 already, and this format is like 2 months old. And they've just been updating the points list really dynamically. They put the original list out. They had a weekend of tournaments with the original list, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Players discovered like 3 or 4 like pretty broken strategies that were not well covered by the list, and they just immediately covered them on the list. They put some of the problematic cards to like 35 and, put them on the list at higher numbers so that they fully boxed out those strategies right away. And if you watch anything by MPT, who, if you didn't know, is secretly a Magic player originally, because his name stands for Mono Blue Tron, as far as I'm aware. I don't know, maybe that's wrong, but that's what's been implied by him, at least previously. He's kind of suggested that this might be a tension between Japanese format management and North American format management, that the Japanese portion of Konami wants to balance the format with the banned and restricted list, and that maybe the North American contingent wants to use a points list. And I think it's worth talking about the concept of banned and restricted, because that's the other thing that Yu-Gi-Oh! Does. The other way that Yu-Gi-Oh! Manages its format is they don't have a quite as binary ban and restricted. They have a list where maximum card in a deck is 3, but they sometimes restrict a card to 1, and they sometimes restrict a card to 2. That's a thing that they do as well. You could do that in Magic, like you absolutely could approach a format with that kind of design philosophy. Obviously, in Vintage, we have the concept of cards being restricted to 1. Like for us, restricted only ever means 1. I think for the sake of play patterns, that's not very interesting in a standard environment or like a modern or legacy environment. Like, I don't think restricting the ring in Modern, for example, which was a solution that was floated by some people when the One Ring ban was seemingly imminent in Modern. People were like, well, what if you make it actually legendary so you can only have 1? Doesn't that fix the problem? And I think in Magic, because there aren't the same number of like tutors and the consistency on decks is on average lower, I think that largely just leads to feel bads where your opponent draws their One Ring and you go, oh, I know they only have 1. This is disgusting. Like that I don't think is a positive play experience for anyone involved. And obviously the context in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is very different, because in that game deck size is smaller, so the restrictions are more meaningful. Like your math between having 3 versus 1 card, the chances that you have it in your opening hand are like pretty distinctly different. Whereas in Magic at 4 of 60, if you start restricting cards, I think that it's just not worth it. And I think, again, anytime you're talking about a solution that is not just a ban, you are talking about increased complexity, and complexity is not necessarily evil, but it's a consideration for sure. But yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesys is a points list managed format, and I kind of think this is, obviously I'm biased. I played the Magic format that is currently managed by a points list, but I think this is the way to go in the long term. I don't think that it's possible in all formats. So, standard players, I'm sorry, but I'm not convinced that this is solvable with a points list, because I think that it is unrealistic to ask Wizards to manage 5 of those at the same time, right? But with all that being said, I do think that in particular for management of eternal formats, which are the formats where you tend to have the biggest problems because cards are not tested for eternal interactions in the same way that they are tested for standard interactions. Like, I'm kind of willing to believe that Wizards can figure it out on standard and can start to do a better job of catching these before they get printed. I really do think that. Like, I think that we are still feeling the effects of fire design to an extent, right? Like Throne of Eldraine, which is where Cauldron comes from. Like, that set's almost 3 years old at this point, right? So that's like a 2022 set. That's a set that was being designed to compete with some of the most broken cards that have ever been printed. So I'm sort of willing to believe that it is conceivable that standard is going to be better design-wise. Like, obviously format management-wise, I think that the only thing that I could see potentially working in standard is the banned pairs. I could definitely see that as a potential solution. But for Legacy, why not try a points list? Why not kind of reinvent the way that the format is managed such that you can box out certain interactions with pointings, but allow way more dynamic deck building? And I think that actually, if we look at the Canadian Highlander points list here, like, our points list is obviously it's vintage focused, but this is the kind of thing that I think you would have to do in a format like Legacy, right? Like, you would, obviously you wouldn't unban all these cards because then you'd just be playing vintage, but you would have to look at ways in which to restrict strategies and allow other things to exist at the same time. I think that would require some real, you would want to work with the community, I think, on the first list. And to me, the goal with the first list would be, let's not change anything in the format right now. Let's point things in a way such that basically everything that currently exists can continue to exist. And then as metagame problems develop, let's try to address those with points changes rather than bans. And you could potentially even maybe you could introduce some unbans as well to coincide with that. Like, for example, now that Entomb is on the banned list, like, why is Troll of Khazad-dûm there? For example, like, that seems absurd to me. And maybe if you were managing it with a points list, maybe you wouldn't need it. But that would be asking Wizards to manage a points list. And I do think that that's potentially asking a lot, although, you know, Konami's doing it, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Devs are doing it, and doing a very reasonable job with it. So it's not impossible, I don't think. And I think that, you know, there are real benefits. Changing things on a points list means that cards are never truly gone, which is the real pain point that I think I've highlighted as the big issue with bans. And again, with a points list, I think you could make a points list change monthly, and you could tell players there's going to be a monthly points list cadence change. And yeah, that might be a little bit awkward sometimes, but tournament organizers could just schedule around the change, or could just say, we're going to play with the October points, even though our tournament is November 5th, right? Like, you can work with that. I don't think that is totally outrageous. And with these eternal formats, at this point, because so many new cards are being printed, I think there needs to be some amount of dynamic changes and addressing of points changes. The last thing I wanted to say, and I wanted to make a longer form video about this, but I did not feel as though I was the right person to necessarily talk about this because I didn't think I had enough experience in the format. But I wanted to talk about CEDH as well. So CEDH is a format that I've kind of like followed from afar. I think it's pretty interesting. I like watch some amount of content related to CEDH. I'm like broadly aware of what the best decks are and what the kind of sentiment in the community is. But I'm not involved enough to say, hey, CEDH players, you should manage your format with a points list. That being said, I think that it is maybe the best candidate of all of these things that I've talked about to be managed in that way. And the reason for that is that it is another 100 card singleton format. Wizards has acknowledged that it exists now, right? Like it is now like the bracket 5 format. So people have kind of hit the point of recognition. You are no longer just playing Commander to win. You are identified as a subset of Commander. And whether it's Wizards or whether it is maybe an effort by the community, I do think that there's like a reasonable case to be made that the format could be managed with a points list in an interesting way. I did a decent amount of research, did some exploration of like what the best decks in the format are, what the kind of like most common cards in the format are. There's a very nice website that tracks the kind of the playing of specific cards in top performing decks that are reported EDH top 16. And I think that if you look at it, right, you look at this, you have this case study for like, hey, so we know that Esper Sentinel is in 87% of decks. I mean, obviously this data is warped because it's just data based on submissions to this website, tournaments that have been submitted to this website, deck lists that have been registered to that tournament. Not every tournament gets every deck list registered. I know that this is biased data. But like when we look at things like Sol Ring is in 97% of decks, Rhystic Study is in 91% of decks, Vampiric Tutor is in 91% of decks. It feels to me like there is a way that you could look at this data, look at the decks that are being played, and find a way to manage this format in a way that didn't require you to wait on Wizards to make bans. And the reason I say that is that Wizards is unlikely, in my opinion, to make bans with CEDH in mind. They regard Commander as a format that can be managed socially before it needs to be managed with bans and things of that ilk. And I think it's more likely that you will see unbans than bans in the future. Now, there is a real question. Does CDH care? Do CDH players care that their format is largely going to be unmanaged intentionally? I don't know. I don't think that they care that much. I know certainly the sentiment for a lot of CEDH players that they're just happy trying to play CEDH at, or they're happy to just play basically Commander but to win, and that's fine. But if you were to approach a format like CEDH and say, hey, I think that this is unbalanced, and I think that if you're looking at these staple numbers, like, it is unbalanced. Like, there are things that are obviously problematic, but you don't want to institute a banned list because then you're really playing a different format. A points list might well allow you to exist within the current Commander banned list while introducing some amount of balance to the format. So, like, for me, the thing with CDH that I find really interesting are like decks like this. So like this is a Rowan Scion of War deck, and this is a Storm deck that is paying a bunch of life to eventually set up a Storm win, right? Like to basically activate Rowan, discount a bunch of spells. You're playing a bunch of things that cost life, and then a bunch of spells that are more expensive. They have a bunch of generic mana in their cost, but once you've activated Rowan, they're very cheap. You do this, you storm off, you win the game. And this to me is what I think I would like CEDH to look like. This is a deck that has a commander that has text, right? The text on the commander is relevant to what the rest of the deck is doing. And the strategy is tied to only two colors because the commander's effect is so powerful that you're kind of forced to play this. Now, I think this deck is playable. You can see actually there's a bunch of good results in this description here, right? So that's cool. But for me, like when you look at some of the other things that people play in the format, like Blue Farm or like Timna Thrasios, like these are decks that to me just kind of look like good card soup. And the partner commanders are obviously a big issue, and I think that there's an entire video to be made on how partner was maybe a problematic mechanic. But like you're playing Thrasios because it's an infinite mana outlet in the command zone and it gives you blue-green. You're playing Tymna because she's a value creature that gives you green, black-white. And that's kind of it. Like, the rest of the deck is just good cards, and if you pretended that these commanders weren't here, like the deck is obviously worse because it doesn't have its commanders, but this deck would just be functional, right? Like this could just be a Canlander deck. I mean, not quite, right? Like some of these effects are really keyed into specifically the mechanics of playing in a 4-player game, but you get the basic idea. Similarly, right, like I think something like Kefka is kind of interesting because this is a deck that's trying to do things like haste out its commander to generate card advantage versus, say, Rogsai, where Rogsai is kind of on the like fringe for me because like the Rograk interactions where you're playing like Culling the Weak and Diabolic Intent, like, okay, those are kind of interesting, but like Silas is literally just here for the colors, right? And those kinds of design decisions in the format, I mean, clearly people like the format. Clearly it is increasing in popularity daily. So who am I to say that, like, you know, these decks shouldn't exist? I think that they should. Obviously, very clearly they're enjoyed. But I think from a design perspective, like, it's pretty obvious that Partner has problematic impacts on the way that decks are designed and on the way that the metagame shakes out. Like, if you look at the meta share data for CEDH, it's like partner deck, partner deck, partner deck, partner deck, yeah. So it's like 4 of the top 6 are partner decks. Then you have a bunch of others. I don't know. Maybe I'm tripping. Maybe I'm crazy. These meta share data, these meta share percentages look fine. Like, they're not egregious by any means. Maybe CEDH doesn't need anything else, but it's something that I just thought I would bring up as kind of my closing point. I think that when you're talking about like stewardship of a format and management of a format, this is the one that I think has the most capacity to be managed in a different way. It is currently the most underserved, I think, by the use of the commander ban list being what handles the legality in this format. And it's the one that I think has the best capacity to be managed with something better. Most notably, points. I think points are definitely the way to go. So yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about this style of video. I really enjoyed making it. I like sitting here and talking to you in my mornings with my coffee. It's fun. If you want to see more stuff like this, or you want me to elaborate on any of the particular points that I have brought up in this video, comment below, let me know. I do, for example, have a CDH points list. I did make one, and I'm not willing to show it in this video, but if there's enough demand, I would show it off and talk about what my vision of the format would look like. But without further ado, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.